All right. Um, good evening. Good evening, guys. I mean, good afternoon. Actually, you know what? I don't even know why I bring that up sometimes. Anyways, what I felt like um, addressing is what Iqbal actually talks. He, what Iqbal actually says about Carl Jung, and I do feel like an aspect of this is important, and then at the same time, it's also interesting to hear what Iqbal actually agrees concerning Carl Jung. So, to give some context, there is actually a section in the in Iqbal's work called the Reconstruction of Islamic Thought, and it's one of the last sections that Iqbal addresses, and he says it's titled "Is Religion Possible?" Now, the part where he brings up Carl Jung, he's already gone through a couple of questions. But I'm going to read the part where he talks about Carl Jung, and then, you know, we can just kind of reflect on that. So, all right. Um, Iqbal says this: the question for us outsiders is to find out an effective method of inquiry into the nature and significance of this extraordinary experience. The Arab historian Ibn Khaldun, who laid the foundations of modern scientific history, was the first to seriously approach this side of human psychology and reach what we now call the idea of the subliminal self. Later, Sir William Hamilton in England and Leibniz in Germany interested themselves in some of the more unknown phenomena of the mind. Jung, however, is probably right in thinking that the essential nature of religion is beyond the province of analytic psychology. In his discussion of the relation of analytic psychology to poetic art, he tells us that the process of artistic form alone can be the object of psychology. The essential nature of art, according to him, cannot be the object of a psychological method of approach. A similar distinction, says Jung, must also be made in the realm of religion. There also a psychological consideration is permissible only in respect of the emotional and symbolical phenomena of a religion, where the essential nature of religion is in no way involved, as indeed it cannot be. For were this possible, not religion alone, but art also could be treated as a mere subdivision of psychology. And then Iqbal continues on to say, he says, yet Jung has violated his own principle more than once in his writings. The result of this procedure is that instead of giving us a real insight into the essential nature of religion and its meaning for human personality, our modern psychology has given us quite a plethora of new theories which proceed on a complete misunderstanding of the nature of religion as revealed in its higher manifestations and carry us in an entirely hopeless direction. The implication of these theories, says Iqbal, on the whole, is that religion does not relate the human ego to any objective reality beyond himself. It is merely a kind of well meaning biological device calculated to build barriers of an ethical nature round human society in order to protect the social fabric against the otherwise unrestrainable instincts of the ego. That is why, according to this newer psychology, Christianity has already, according, oops, Christianity has already fulfilled its biological mission, and it is impossible for the modern man to understand its original significance. Jung concludes, and now he quotes Jung here, and it's a long quote. And this is Jung talking. Most certainly, we should still understand it, had our customs even a breath of ancient brutality, for we can hardly realize in this day the whirlwinds of the unchained libido which roared through the ancient Rome of the Caesars. The civilized man of the present day seems very far removed from that. He has become merely neurotic. So for us, the necessities which brought forth Christianity have actually been lost, since we no longer understand their meaning. We do not know against what it had to protect us. For enlightened people, the so-called religiousness has already approached very close to a neurosis. In the past 2,000 years, Christianity has done its work and has erected barriers of repression which protect us from the sight of our own sinfulness. Okay, so that's the end of Jung's quote. And then Iqbal says this. He says, "This is missing the whole point of higher religious life. Sexual self-restraint is only a preliminary stage in the ego's evolution. The ultimate purpose of religious life is to make this evolution move in a direction far more important to the destiny of the ego than the moral health of the social fabric which forms his present environment. The basic perception from which religious life moves forward is the present slender unity of the ego, his liability to dissolution, his amenability to reformation, and the capacity for an ampler freedom to create new situations in known and unknown environments." So, I mean, right here, automatically, like Muhammad Iqbal is attacking religion solely on a. I guess what he's trying to say is like, if you attack religion based on its just moral setting, you are completely missing the point, basically, right? Like this idea. I mean, because honestly, when we think about religion, we cannot help but think about morality. But what Iqbal is trying to express here is that morality, that's just for the social fabric. You're still missing the whole point of religion here. And so he's like, you can't, you're only talking about the moral health, right? There's so much you're missing out of religion if that's all we ever talk about. If we were only talking about morality, oh, this is wrong, this is sinful, and so on. He's like, you are missing the complete point of its higher manifestations. And I guess the question is, for people that only ever talk about the moral fabric of religion, what is the higher manifestations? So to continue on, Iqbal says, in view of this fundamental perception, higher religious life fixes its gaze on experiences symbolic of those subtle movements of reality which seriously affect the destiny of the ego as a possibly permanent element in the constitution of reality. If we look at the matter from this point of view, modern psychology has not yet touched even the outer fringe of religious life, and is still far from the richness and variety of what is called religious experience. In order to give you an idea of its richness and variety, I quote here the substance of a passage from a great religious genius of the 7th century, Sheikh Ahmed of Sarhand, whose fearless analytical criticism of contemporary Sufism resulted in the development of a new technique. All the various system of Sufi technique in India came from Central Asia and Arabia. His is the only technique which crossed the Indian border and is still a living force in the Punjab, Afghanistan, Asiatic Russia, I'm afraid it is not possible for me to expound the real meaning of this passage in the language of modern psychology, for such language does not yet exist. Since, however, my object is simply to give you an idea of the infinite wealth of experience which the ego in his divine quest has to sift and pass through, I do hope you will excuse me for the apparently outlandish terminology which possesses a real substance of meaning, but which was formed under the inspiration of a religious psychology developed in the atmosphere of a different culture. Uh, Coming now to the passage, the experience of one of Abdul Momin was described to the Sheikh as follows. So this experience of Abdul Momin is, this quote is what is actually coming from what this man is saying. So here is what he says. He says, heavens and earth and God's throne and hell and paradise have all ceased to exist for me. When I look around, I find them nowhere. When I stand in the presence of somebody, I see nobody before me. Nay, even my own being is lost to me. God is infinite. Nobody can encompass him, and this is the extreme limit of spiritual experience. No saint has been able to go beyond this. On this, the Sheikh replied, the experience which is described has its origin in the ever-varying life of the qalb. And it appears to me that the recipient of it has not yet passed even 1/4 of the innumerable stations of the qalb. The remaining 3/4 must be passed through in order to finish the experiences of this first station of spiritual life. Beyond this station, there are other stations, known as Ruh, the Sir Kafi, and Sir Akfa. Each of these stations, which together constitute what is technically called Alam Amr, has its own characteristic states and experiences. After having passed through these stations, the seeker of truth gradually receives the illuminations of divine names and divine attributes, and finally the illuminations of the divine essence. So that's the end of the quote. And then Iqbal continues on. He says, whatever may be the psychological ground of the distinctions made in this passage, it gives us at least some idea of a whole universe of inner experience as seen by a great reformer of Islamic Sufism. According to him, this Alam Amr, that is to say, the world of directive energy, must be passed through before one reaches that unique experience which symbolizes the purely objective. This is the reason why I say that modern psychology has not yet touched even the outer fringe of the subject. Personally, I do not at all feel hopeful of the present state of things in either biology or psychology. Merely analytical criticism with some understanding of the organic conditions of the imagery in which religious life has sometimes manifested itself is not likely to carry us to the living roots of human personality. Assuming that sex imagery has played a role in the history of religion, or that religion has furnished imaginative means of escape from or adjustment to an unpleasant reality, these ways of looking at the matter cannot in the least affect the ultimate aim of religious life. That is to say, the reconstruction of the finite ego by bringing him into contact with an internal life process, and thus giving him a metaphysical status of which we can have only a partial understanding in the half-choking atmosphere of our present environment. If, therefore, the science of psychology is ever likely to possess a real significance for the life of mankind, it must develop an independent method calculated to discover a new technique better suited to the tempo of our times. Perhaps a psychopath endowed with a great intellect, the combination is not an impossibility, may give us a clue to such a technique. In modern Europe, Nietzsche, whose life and activity form, at least to us Easterns, an exceedingly interesting problem in religious psychology, was endowed with some sort of a constitutional equipment for such an undertaking. His mental history is not without a parallel in the history of Eastern Sufism. So actually, Iqbal, he's talking about if we want to try to understand religious experience better, maybe we need to look at the person that what we would identify in psychology as having actually a mental problem. And he brings up Nietzsche uh, as this because he's saying Nietzsche obviously had some type of equipment to understand, and Nietzsche actually poses an interesting problem. Iqbal says to um, religious psychology. But anyways, Iqbal continues. He says his mental history is not without a parallel in the history of Eastern Sufism. That a really imperative vision of the divine in man did come to him cannot be denied. Obviously, to be fair, this is Iqbal's interpretation of Nietzsche's experience. I call his vision imperative because it appears to have given him a kind of prophetic mentality, which, by some kind of technique, aims at turning its visions into permanent life forces. Yet Nietzsche was a failure, and his failure was mainly due to his intellectual progenitors, such as Schopenhauer, Darwin, and Lange, whose influence completely blinded him to the real significance of his vision. Instead of looking for a spiritual rule which would develop the divine, even I think plebeian, and thus open up before him an infinite future, Nietzsche was driven to seek the realization of his vision in such scheme as aristocratic radicalism, as I have said of him elsewhere. Obviously, this is um, things that people can disagree with, but I will continue on with what Iqbal's saying. He says, thus, failed a genius whose vision was solely determined by his internal forces and remained unproductive for want of external guidance in his spiritual life. And the irony of fate is that this man, who appeared to his friends as if he had come from a country where no man lived, was fully conscious of his great spiritual need. I confront alone, he says, an immense problem. It is as if I am lost in a forest, a primeval one. I need help. I need disciples. I need a master. It would be so sweet to obey. I think he's quoting Nietzsche in this. And again, quote, why do I not find among the living men who see higher than I do and have to look down on me? Is it only that I have made a poor search and I have so great a longing for such? And then, okay, so Iqbal continues. He says, the truth is that the religious and the scientific processes, though involving different methods, are identical in their final aim. Actually, this kind of reminds me of absolute knowing, if I'm being honest. Both aim at reaching the most real. In fact, religion, for reasons which I have mentioned before, is far more anxious to reach the ultimately real than science. And to both, the way to pure objectivity lies through what may be called the purification of experience. In order to understand this, we must make a distinction between experience as a natural fact, significant of the normally observable behavior of reality, and experience as a significant of the inner nature of reality. I don't want to, I don't, okay, I think I will go on just a little bit more because obviously he's saying a lot right now. So I'll finish up this paragraph. As a natural fact, it is explained in light of its antecedents, psychological and physiological, as significant of the inner nature of reality, we shall have to apply criteria of a different kind to clarify its meaning. So I'll stop there because at this point, Iqbal is saying like, the question that instantly comes to my mind is what does he mean? How do we purify experience? And this does this almost sounds Kantian, but it's almost like he doesn't want to actually take away experience. So it would be a mistake to say that this is Kantian, um, because the Kantian notion is to purify the thing as to make it not experience is not involved in the process, at least from what I understand of Kant. But I think Iqbal is like, how do we purify this experience further, um, while still maintaining experience itself? Um, so I think that's a very interesting question that he proposes, and ultimately, because I have read this book like twice, I will say that he leaves it open, um, and he does have some suggestions, but he leaves it open and for religious experience, this avenue to really explore. And again, his gripe about religion and the aim of religion is that if you're talking about religion solely in the moral fabric, then you're completely missing the aim of religion itself. So I think that his critique about Jung, that Jung violates his own principles, it seems like Iqbal is simply saying that Jung is contradicting himself, that he actually went against what he actually said about religion and art, that he actually did try to find a method. But again, this is Iqbal's interpretation of Jung, so there's always that gap. And even though Nietzsche was brought into the framework as well in this reading, again, that is also Iqbal's interpretation of Nietzsche. There are some things I will say as like a sort of caveat, as a side note. I will say my own interpretation of Nietzsche is actually not in line with the way Iqbal reads him. I actually think he misunderstands Nietzsche in terms of the eternal recurrence. So, there's a disagreement there when I read Iqbal, but other than that, I still think that entertaining the idea that Nietzsche had some kind of prophetic experience, I mean, this is interesting to entertain. And the fact that, it's a Muslim saying that Nietzsche had a prophetic experience. I mean, this is significant here, because to basically call another person that is non-Muslim on the level of having basically being a prophet, this is what most Muslims would just call like a great sin. But again, you can already tell that Iqbal is trying to go above the notions of the moral fabric of religion. So this means that the moment you go beyond this, you are entering into realms that we don't really know about, and we don't have the psychology terminology to even talk about this. So it always sounds very mystical and very obscure and just strange. But I think he does raise some good points. Anyways, that's really it. I guess. I guess I really should title this like Iqbal's critique of psychology or something like that, even though, because he does talk about Carl Jung, but I figured it's interesting to hear what he does say about Carl Jung, even though it was actually a very small portion of the section. And that was it. That was all he said about Carl Jung. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed that little piece of knowledge from Iqbal. And yeah, that's it.